Number 10. Wonder Man. Wonder Man was literally the guy to organize the Avengers team. This happened because Wonder Man, aka Simon Williams, believed after years and years of having a rough go, to put it lightly, that the Avengers were actually to blame for pretty much all the negative parts of his life. He decided ultimately that the Avengers had to be stopped and put a team together known as the Revengers. The Revengers were literally created to take out the Avengers, and they almost succeeded too. At first, Wonder Man's Revengers attacked the New Avengers team. While initially the New Avengers held their own, ultimately the Revengers prevailed and actually won that fight. Confident in their ability, the Revengers then headed for the main Avenger team. This is where they ended up failing, with Wonder Man being imprisoned while in his ionic form. Let's also not forget that Wonder Man was initially introduced as a supervillain, who himself fought against the Avengers to begin with, so he also literally started out as an antagonist to them, albeit one who was eventually redeemed and ended up ultimately joining the team he had been sent to destroy. But, he's got a long history with them. And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we're doing here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that subscribe button. Number 9. Young Avengers. Hate might be a strong word here, considering that the Young Avengers, are inspired by the main Avengers team, but you can't deny that the Young Avengers at least have some beef with the team that inspired them. At least, they did when they first formed. The Young Avengers, as inspiring teen heroes, actually wanted to learn from their mentors and sought to be trained by them, actually reaching out to the Avengers. However, when they tried to reach out to, get training and get some help and pointers, they ended up being turned away, with Captain America actually refusing to teach them anything initially and even attempting to discourage their attempt to become heroes. In fact, initially the Avengers even tried to prevent the Young Avengers from facing Kang, and even sided with Kang against the Young Avengers member Iron Lad. Kang had in essence shown the Avengers some awful visions of the potential future, were Iron Lad not to fulfill his destiny in becoming Kang, and the Avengers were basically convinced by this. Fortunately, the Young Avengers weren't so easy to lock away, so they managed to escape confinement and prepare for the battle against Kang. Although Iron Lad would ultimately return to his own timeline, resigned to become Kang one day. Times have changed and the Young Avengers have largely become accepted by the Avengers who came before, but the start there, it was kind of rocky. Number 8. Hulkling. During the beginning of Empire, you could definitely argue that Hulkling kinda hated the Avengers, at least for a moment, considering that they were siding with the Alliance's enemies, the Kotati. However, once the Avengers learned the truth of the Kotati's plans and their vendetta to, in essence, destroy all organic life, it became clear to them that the Alliance were actually more the side to ally with in this intergalactic fight. In fact, the whole reason that Hulkling had in essence been able to bring together the long-warring empires of both the Skrull and the Kree to create the Alliance, other than his parentage being a Kree-Skrull hybrid born both of Skull royalty and a celebrated Kree war hero, was because of this unified threat, the Kotati. Number 7. Spider-Man. While Spider-Man has himself been an Avenger, that doesn't mean he's always seen eye to eye with the team or always gotten along with them. In fact, at one point they kind of betrayed his trust, or at least, one of them did. Yep, I'm talking about Iron Man during Civil War, the first Civil War, baby. It was during Civil War that Spider-Man was convinced by Tony Stark to reveal his true identity to the world as part of a push for the Superhuman Registration Act, revealing that Spider-Man, aka Peter Parker, stood with Iron Man, aka Tony Stark, and supported the act. Stark believed that for accountability's sake, it was actually really important to reveal their civilian identities to the public. Of course, this almost immediately backfired, with a hit being put out on Peter, and after an attack on his life went wrong, Aunt May ending up in critical care. It would ultimately be Peter's choice to side with Avenger Tony Stark that would result in Mary Jane and himself making a deal with Mephisto to restore Peter's secret identity and save Aunt May in exchange for their marriage. So yeah. Number 6. Eternals. The Eternals and Avengers both seem to have beef with each other when the two teams clashed in AXE, which, for those who are unfamiliar, was the summer to winter event of 2022. Avengers vs. X-Men vs. Eternals, or AXE, or AXE. Judgment Day. Here the X-Men were being attacked by the race known as the Eternals, who were now being led by the manipulative Druig. To combat this, some members of the Eternals team sought to bring back one of their gods, the Celestials, in the hopes that, the Celestial would right all the chaos going on and basically punish Druig. They kidnapped Tony Stark and worked with him to resurrect a fallen Celestial, essentially breathing new life into it and creating kind of a new Celestial altogether. Iron Man agreed to help, but based the nervous system off his own. And ultimately, when the progenitor woke and came online, it gave the entire Earth 24 hours to prove that they were worthy of life. The Eternals and the X-Men then both kind of looked at Tony and, well, kind of blamed him for this in part. He did base it off of himself, so yikes. Number 5. Emma Frost. Emma Frost definitely is more inclined to give the Avengers the cold shoulder from time to time. To her, they deserve it. Emma's posed question when it comes to the Avengers and their relationship to mutant kind and the X-Men is, what have you done for us lately? Despite her and Tony Stark even having had an established on and off again romance between them, she has no qualms with also grilling him on why he and the Avengers team have never been around when mutants needed them most. Like, during the tragedy in Genosha. Like many mutants, Emma is left wondering why the Avengers haven't used, the fact that they're loved and celebrated the world over to stand with mutants and actively attempt to lift them up in the public eye and help fight against everyone that hates them. Tony's response to Emma's line of questioning is to point out that, the Avengers have also had a hard time when it comes to their being accepted by the world. But Emma, she isn't buying it. And to be fair, mutant-based heroes have traditionally had it, I think, a lot harder in comparison to human-based heroes, so I think I stand with Emma on this one. Number 4. Beast. Beast is having a wild time in his life right now in the comics. Oh, Hank, what happened to you? He is in essence Dark Beast, but what if Dark Beast simply existed in the main continuity, because we know Dark Beast is dead, so this can't be Dark Beast, sadly. We can't explain it away. Recently, Beast created his own Council of Beasts, and every time I see him do just about anything in the comments lately, I question if he is still sane and isn't somehow losing his mind. Beast is currently the head of X-Force, which seems to have made him extremely paranoid against anything that isn't actively advertising itself as being very, very pro-mutant, which is where the Avengers come in. They have never really been actively pro-mutant, I would say, although at times they have worked to try and better understand their friends the X-Men and have even stood with mutants and sometimes been an ally. They have also, though, done things to, in a roundabout way, kind of harm mutants, or at least, haven't always been there when mutant kind really could have used some help from the heroes. So whether or not they are on Beast's strike list, they are most likely a team that he would not care for. And honestly, even some of the folks Beast does seem to care for, or has cared for in the past at least, have seemingly popped up on his strike list of late. So just based on that, it's not looking good for the Avengers standing with Hank. Number 3. Daredevil. Currently in the comics, Daredevil is the one with a target on his back when it comes to the hero the Avengers are currently going after. And get this, the reason they want to bring Daredevil to justice is because he's trying to reform villains. Like, wait, what? Apparently, we can chalk this feud up to a misunderstanding where so many hero versus hero conflicts obviously come from. The Avengers have simply assumed that Daredevil is looking to build up a villain army, as opposed to, simply talking to him and seeing that Matt Murdock is in fact just trying to give villains a second chance. It's not a villain army, and is actually trying to turn them into heroes, which you'd think the Avengers would kinda be all for, because it just helps everyone. If only they simply were willing to sit down and have a conversation, instead of jumping to conclusions. But obviously, they can't do that, because comics. Number 2. The Punisher. Frank Castle and the Avengers have had a rocky relationship throughout the years, and when you look at both their differing philosophies on heroism and their approaches to it, kinda makes sense. To the Avengers, Frank Castle tends to go too far. For the Punisher, there are many times when the Avengers simply don't go far enough, and it actually came to a point where the Avengers were hunting Frank and trying to capture him in Punisher Warzone. They even succeeded with Iron Man putting him in his own separate cell where he was kept a safe distance away from all other prisoners at all times, because Tony knew if Frank felt he had a chance, he would kill the criminals he was locked up with, which, to be fair to Tony, he probably would. Number 1. X-Men. The X-Men hate the Avengers because while the Avengers also get a lot of flack sometimes for things, for the most part they can't really relate when it comes to what it's like to deal with all the hate that the X-Men and mutant kind just get for, well, being themselves and existing. Overall, the world loves the Avengers, but overall the world world tends to hate or judge the X-Men just because they're mutants, even though the X-Men have saved the world like multiple times. The differences between the two and just how much the Avengers didn't really get what was going on for the X-Men was highlighted during the Avengers vs. X-Men event, also known as AVX. Although at least out of that we got the Uncanny Avengers, which was a team that Captain America put together in the hopes of mending the relationship between the two teams, which, you know, kind of worked, I think.
Kicking off the list though, at number 10 is Luke Cage. For a street level hero who came from those same streets, Luke Cage has come a long way. And while he works with almost every superhero out there, he cannot see eye to eye with at least one. That's Iron Man. It's honestly a very simple explanation. Like I said, Luke Cage came from the streets, and he looks out for those streets and the people that live on them. Tony Stark, on the other hand, came from wealth. He was an arms dealer. He never looked out for the little guys, not on the small scale at least. When he moved to heroism, his eyes were always set on the bigger picture, and it's one of his biggest character flaws. When Tony focuses on the bigger picture, he puts everyone else to the wayside and has continuously made bad decisions based on what he thinks is right, when in actuality, it puts a lot of people in worse positions. While almost everyone on this list is affected by this, it's basically the opposite of what Luke Cage stands for, and therefore, these two, they don't really see eye to eye. Number 9. Spider-Man. Thanks to the MCU, Robert Downey Jr. and Tom Holland, most people believe that Spider-Man and Tony Stark are as thick as thieves. And they are! In the MCU, there was a time where comic book Tony Stark and Peter Parker got along. In the beginning of the comic book Civil War event, Peter was all for Tony's Superhuman Registration Act, and this was partially because of the way that Peter admired Tony Stark. But Iron Man was totally using this admiration to his own advantage. He used Peter's naivety to convince Spider-Man to unmask himself to the world, which caused untold amounts of problems for the hero, not only in that story but even outside of it, and it even sort of indirectly led to the split between Peter and Mary Jane Watson. Not only that, but once Peter saw the flaws in Tony's ways during Civil War, he switched sides, and that seemingly led Iron Man to have a personal vendetta against Spider-Man, with Tony using knowledge of Peter's personal life in order to attack him. While time has passed since then, I think the stings of those actions still left an impression on Parker. Also, Tony totally insulted Peter when he was head of Parker Industries. You'd think an industrialist like Tony would be more supportive, but nay, he was not. Number 8. Namor the Submariner. Sure, Tony Stark is massively intelligent, but he's also a massive jerk with an ego that could fill a mansion. You take that ego and you put it eye to eye with an ego that could fill an Olympic-sized pool, like Namor the Submariner's ego, for example, and that's just a breeding ground for conflict. Nothing is more fragile than a dude with a massive ego. These two have egos out the wing-wang, which when paired up has caused them to come to blows on multiple occasions, even when they were on the same team like the Illuminati, although that team wasn't exactly flawless, ever. But it's not all ego. Namor is a king before he is anything else, and he will always look out for the best interests of his people, at least according to him. Iron Man has made quite a few rash decisions for immediate results that put everyone else at risk, including the Atlanteans, and even before his time as a superhero, Tony Stark's other job as an industrialist has caused pollution of the oceans, which is something Namor really is not a fan of. Number 7. Thor. If we are speaking of Iron Man's bad decisions, Civil War is like the biggest example. To be fair, the Superhuman Registration Act actually seems like a good idea in theory, given the amount of destruction that the superpowered community causes. But then again, when Tony couldn't get into contact with Thor to make him join his side, he instead decided to use the Asgardians' genetic information to create an out-of-control robot clone of Thor called Ragnarok that used its almost godly power to usher superheroes to the afterlife. As you can imagine, when Thor eventually came back, he was not exactly pleased. Not only that, but the victorious Iron Man tried to tell the extremely powerful god what was what and how he should act, and Thor responded by making sure that Iron Man understood the error of his ways. Number 6. Hawkeye. Not all heroes start off as heroes. Hawkeye certainly did not, as he was originally an Iron Man villain. Hawkeye worked as a circus act performing at Coney Island, where his marksmanship failed to impress the crowds compared to Iron Man's heroics. Deciding to prove his own worth as an archer, Hawkeye designed several trick arrows and a costume that he donned with the intention of becoming an adventurer. He eventually became caught in Black Widow's scheme to defeat Iron Man, introducing both her and Hawkeye as villains for the first time. But while Black Widow seemingly dropped her disdain for Tony Stark, Hawkeye did not, even though he beat Iron Man twice in his first appearance. I think it may just be residual feelings from that first encounter, but Hawkeye has never been able to really look past Tony's flaws. The interesting thing, at least for me, is that I kind of feel as though they share a lot of the same flaws. So I guess that makes people butt heads? Number 5. Captain America. Of course we have to talk about Captain America. Marvel's Civil War event was one of its biggest and most well known. Not to mention how a good chunk of characters on this list feel the way they do because of that event. At the core of it all though was Iron Man and Captain America and their opposing views on superhero registration and the rights of those with abilities. Steve Rogers felt that heroes needed to be above direct government control because when politicians could control the heroes, they could decide who the villains were. Freedom over control. Iron Man, on the other hand, felt that it was reasonable that heroes have proper training and oversight, that the casual self-policing the superhero community had enjoyed until now was insufficient, and that it was now impossible to resist this change in the political landscape. These ideals are echoed in the natures of both Steve Rogers and Tony Stark, causing them to be opposed in so many different minute ways. To say they hate each other is not very accurate, but they have differences of opinion that lead them into conflict. But at their cores, they still respect one another and genuinely do want a better future for the world. They just go about it in very different ways. Number 4. The Incredible Hulk. A catalyst for the Civil War event were the multiple instances where superpowered beings have caused such massive destruction, whether it was on purpose or not. While Bruce Banner as the Hulk has never meant harm on any innocents, he is unfortunately one of the main points of conversation when discussing the damage superheroes can do. Just prior to Civil War, one Hulk rampage in Las Vegas robbed away the living status of 28 people and a dog. While this was one of many different events that led to the Superhuman Registration Act, this one was different because, unknown to the general public, the Illuminati, which Iron Man is a prominent member of, decided to deal with the issue of the Hulk by loading him into a rocket and blasting him off into space. Hulk basically made a home out there in space, and then just like that, it was taken from him thanks to a self-destruct on that very same rocket. The Illuminati banished the Hulk from the Earth and then took away the new home that he created. As you can imagine, Hulk came back with a vengeance in World War Hulk, and pretty much no one could stop him. Number 3. The Mutants. I don't think Tony Stark hates mutants, but I sure do think that he doesn't give a damn about them. Iron Man attempted to recruit the X-Men during Civil War, and Emma Frost rightly pointed out that the Avengers did nothing when Genosha was attacked by Sentinels. 16 million mutants passed away, and the other heroes, Iron Man included, were almost nowhere to be found. But the bigger elephant in the room is the fact that what Tony is even supporting in his Civil War is the Superhuman Registration Act, which itself was just an evolution of the Mutant Registration Act that purposefully segregated mutants for being who they were born to be. Tony didn't really care about that. He cared about having powerful pawns on his side. He would rather have them on his side since they are useful to keep around, but he doesn't actually care about their struggle, and he doesn't even fully trust mutants. Also, during Avengers vs. X-Men, Tony Stark was the one that tried to destroy the Phoenix Force, which split it into 5 pieces and gave 5 mutants the power of the Phoenix, and that caused way more problems than if he just did nothing at all, like he probably should have. Number 2. Captain Marvel. We've gone on and on about Marvel's Civil War, but we haven't even mentioned the second one. That's mainly because it sucked, but it still happened. While Tony Stark still remained a key figure, it was a different captain this time around that opposed him. After the discovery of an inhuman precog named Ulysses Kane, Captain Marvel wanted Ulysses to work with the Ultimates in order to preemptively tackle disasters before they even happen. But Iron Man opposed the idea, suggesting it was dangerous to take Ulysses' visions as fact, as it was possible to prevent the events that Ulysses saw, meaning his visions were not set in stone. Also, Tony brought into question the morality of stopping and punishing somebody for a disaster they could potentially do and might not even know that they would do it, if that makes sense. While technically I think Tony was actually right here, it still split the superhero community and led to a conflict, but these two have actually been butting heads and coming to blows for a long time. It's almost safe to say that they never have actually really been friends at all. And finally, in at number 1, Stingray. Who the heck is Stingray? Yeah, I asked the same question. Tony Stark is kind of a huge jerk sometimes. You may have gathered that from watching this list. He just kind of does things without thinking it through. He's more of a shoot first, ask questions later kind of guy, and well, that kind of thinking gets you into trouble sometimes. Back in the day, there was a little Iron Man centric story arc called Armor Wars, which kicked off when it was revealed that the villain Spy Master had stolen some Iron Man armor and then had sold those secrets to Justin Hammer, who then sold them to criminals and heroes alike. Armed with his usual arsenal and a list of people who had his secrets, Tony went off and tried to recover his tech. On his list of various heroes and villains was a hero called Stingray, aka probably one of the nicest people in Marvel Comics. He was basically house sitting on the West Coast Avengers island base when Iron Man showed up demanding that Stingray hand over his suit. When Stingray refuses and tries to run away from Iron Man ain't playing any games, and he basically traps Stingray with an avalanche and then renders him unconscious with an electric trap, just to find out that Stingray has no Stark tech in his suit at all. That's what happened. What a jerk. Coming in at number 10 is Iron Man. After the discovery of an inhuman precog named Ulysses Kane, Captain Marvel wanted Ulysses to work with the Ultimates in order to preemptively tackle disasters before they happen. But Iron Man opposed the idea, suggesting it was dangerous to take his visions as fact, as it was possible to prevent the events Ulysses saw, meaning his visions were not set in stone. And Tony also brought into question the morality of stopping and punishing somebody for a disaster they could potentially do and might not even know they will do. While technically I think Tony was in the right here, it still split the superhero community down the center and led to conflict. But these two have been butting heads and coming to blows for a long time. It's almost safe to say that they have never really been that great of friends. Number 9, Rogue. The mutant Rogue first started out as a villain in Marvel Comics. She was part of Mystique's Brotherhood of Evil Mutants, and one of their first attacks on the Avengers involved ambushing a recently returned Carol Danvers. Rogue, who was still learning to use her abilities, accidentally fully absorbed both Danvers' memories and her powers. The attack completely drained Carol of her powers and erased her mind, and then, to add insult to injury, Rogue decided that she was immediately going to chuck Carol off the Golden Gate Bridge. Luckily, Spider-Woman was there and was able to rescue Carol Danvers, and Professor Xavier was able to restore her memories, but it wasn't complete. The actual emotional connection to those memories, as well as to her family and friends, was completely gone. Carol remembered things, but it was more like watching a TV show about her life instead of actually living her life. Carol regained her powers eventually, but Carol's life was destroyed by a scared young woman who then had to deal with the consequences of her actions and the harm it caused to both of them. Number 8, Rocket Raccoon. Even though he looks like a little cute raccoon, Rocket is really not very easy to get along with. He's got understandable anger issues, a hell of a potty mouth, he doesn't seem to believe he's a talking animal, and even when he likes you, he has a funny way of showing it. For Rocket and Carol Danvers, these two clashed when Rocket first outed Carol's cat Chewie as a member of the alien species Flurkin. Flurkin look just like regular old house cats, except for the fact that they're not. They can store entire pocket dimensions inside their bodies, they lay hundreds of eggs, and they can produce massive monstrous tentacles from their mouths that allow them to swallow people whole. So yeah, Rocket was not sure whether he should erase Carol's pet from existence or capture it and sell it, and those were his only two options. While neither of those ever happened, and Rocket and Chewie eventually got along, I think Carol still holds just a tiny little bit of resentment for that. Number 7, Magneto. Magneto, in my opinion, is not a hero. Okay, I just want to say that. He has done the right things a few times, but he's done the wrong things way more times. For example, all the times he has specifically tried to eradicate Captain Marvel. Obviously, with Magneto as a villain and Danvers working with the X-Men for a chunk of time, they were gonna come to blows. That's a given. But Magneto has taken the life of a corrupted version of Captain Marvel before, and then, in Captain Marvel Volume 9, Issue Number 9, Carol and Alpha Flight are confronted by Magneto about drones that they were using to keep an eye on him as he was somewhat turning over a new leaf. Sort of. He elevated the conversation to say that the next step of the spying were camps to hold mutants. And then Carol decides she's going to criticize the Master of Magnetism for the way that he compares everything to how his past was entangled with the horrors of World War II Europe. Pretty insensitive from the captain here, just saying. Not really a fan of that. Number 6, Wonder Man. This is kind of going back in time a little bit, and I wouldn't say these two heroes necessarily hate each other. What I will say is they've had discussions. In the Avengers issue 195, Wonder Man and Ms. Marvel faced ideological challenges over their perspectives on gender equality. Essentially, the ex-actor, Wonder Man, was out of commission for a good, decent chunk of time, so that when he was brought back to, he may have had a few old-fashioned points of view. When they clash in the comic, it's because Wonder Man begins talking about how he and Iron Man should have busted into an enemy base to save the Wasp, but before he can finish his sentence, Ms. Marvel assumes he is going to say it's because he and Iron Man are men. And she goes on a tirade about how Wasp is a valued member of the team and times have changed from Wonder Man's day and that the female heroes aren't just damsels in distress. And yeah, she's right, they aren't. Which makes it awkward though when he reveals he was only saying that because they're all friends. But he has made some comments like what Carol was referring to before, which leads me to believe there is some animosity there. Or at least there was. Maybe for a little bit. Number 5. She-Hulk. She-Hulk and Captain Marvel share a close bond as teammates on the Avengers. The two are regarded as some of the strongest heroines in the Marvel Universe in terms of sheer raw power. The pair also served together as co-leaders and founders of the all-female team A-Force. She-Hulk and Captain Marvel sided during the events of Marvel's first Civil War, so no, they don't really hate each other, like a lot of the entries on this list, but it was actually the second Civil War where things became a little dicey for the pair. At the beginning of the conflict, Jennifer Walters was all for Captain Marvel's ideals, but she becomes out of commission and in a coma. When Jennifer comes back too, things have kinda changed. Not only is she now gray, but thanks to the ideals Captain Marvel was supporting, it led directly to the passing of Bruce Banner at the hands of Hawkeye, and that was not something She-Hulk was a fan of at all. Carol had essentially taken the fight way too far, and because of that, she lost the love of She-Hulk for a good chunk of time. Number 4, Spider-Woman. Spider-Woman and Carol Danvers, just like Jennifer up above, actually should be really good friends. And they are. Jessica Drew was the one that saved Carol after her interaction with Rogue all the way back when. They're almost as thick as thieves. They're best friends, but still, for a short period in her latest series, Jess was not a fan of the energy-wielding hero, or really anyone for that matter. Jess had been exposed to a serum that made her go a little ragey. After putting up with this for several issues, Carol had enough. Carol trapped Jess in a cage, or more like a restraining pod for the Incredible Hulk, and while this was Carol looking out for Jessica's own good, Jess was raging at the time and she said some extremely personal and hurtful things about Carol and the fact that she will never have little Carols running around, and that's not okay. She was not herself, but that kind of statement does not come without some kind of anger or resentment, even from a best friend. Luckily, they did make up though, I think. I hope. Number 3, Mystique. Just like Magneto, Mystique, in my humble opinion, is not a hero. She's actually really horrible, but she does have a nice side, and she does do things for a greater good sometimes. More like her own greater good, but you know what I mean. She just does it in a pretty villainous way. When looking up people who hate Carol Danvers though, Mystique is top of the list, and I feel like I have to mention her. It's actually though for a pretty wholesome reason. Sort of. So you know how Rogue did what she did to Carol? Well, that was because Mystique sent her on the mission in the first place, and Rogue wanted to prove herself to Mystique as the blue-skinned mutant had become something of a mother to Rogue. Mystique's better half is another mutant named Destiny, who can see the future with relative certainty depending on the timing of the vision. Well, she had one vision where Captain Marvel makes their darling Rogue's life pretty miserable, and they don't want that for the protege, and just like the way Carol uses Ulysses' visions as fact, so does Mystique, and therefore she hates Carol and wants to see her demise. This is how it goes. Number 2, Medusa. While Tony Stark and Captain Marvel have clashed in Civil War II, the fight was all over an Inhuman who was not really there to be used in the first place. But the Inhuman involved here was not alone. As an Inhuman, Ulysses had friends in the rest of his race. The other Inhumans and one important Inhuman made her thoughts pretty clear about the way Captain Marvel wanted to use a member of her race as a tool to stop potential threats before they are even conceived. That person was the Queen of the Inhumans, Medusa. Put aside the moral argument of whether it's okay to take action against someone who hadn't actually done anything wrong yet, taking an individual with free will and forcing them to use their powers for a misguided goal isn't exactly going to win anyone any brownie points, and Captain Marvel lost all her brownie points with Medusa that day. And finally, in at number 1, the Avengers. I could talk about specific heroes for my number 1 point, but I wanted to try something a little different by talking about a team. Through the years, Captain Marvel has been and not not been an Avenger, and every time she was an Avenger, she always seems to feel as though her team was not there for her in the way she needed them when she needed them most. Like, for example, when she was manipulated by her weird, quickly aging son Marcus, and the Avengers acted like it was a good thing. She rejected the Avengers over her resentment towards them allowing the lying Marcus to effectively kidnap her for future defilement at his own hands. And then, right after that, she had her run-in with Rogue, and the Avengers were nowhere to be found except for Spider-Woman, which caused her to rebuke them even more and spend a lot more time with the X-Men. On the flip side of that, as she has grown, she has gone from abandoning the team to leading the team to creating new teams and just floating around the Avengers landscape. I don't think the Avengers hate her, and I don't really think she hates the Avengers, but I think Carol has had enough bad and good interactions for her relationship with teams like the Avengers to be questionable.
Number 10. Emma Frost. Hate is a pretty strong word here. However, it does seem that Emma Frost has at least been greatly annoyed by Spider-Man in the past. During the second annual Hellfire Gala on Krakoa, Spider-Man, who was a guest at the gala, ran out and ended up starting a fight with another mutant. While looking out at this altercation, Emma remarked, "Tisk, you really can't take Spider-Man anywhere, can you?" And friends, before we move on to our next spot on this list, if you love what we do here at Top 10 Nerd, why not show us you love us by clicking that like button? Number 9. Kane Parker. When it comes to the word hate, I feel the need somewhat to elaborate on its use here. Hate for me has always been a strong word to use, and one I'm often cautious to use in my own personal everyday life, even when talking about fictional characters and stories. Actually, especially when talking about fictional characters and stories. I tend to reserve the word hate for real-world events that are unbelievably abhorrent. That being said, people seem to love this word on some platforms, and I know for most out there, this word is one that simply can be used as an alternative for disliking, disagreeing, being annoyed by, or, fighting someone. So with that in mind, take its use here with a grain of salt and let's dive further in. Kane and Peter have a complicated relationship, and that's putting it lightly. While on one hand, they're both cut from the same cloth, with Kane being the first clone of Peter to have been created by the Jackal villain Miles Warren, Kane's life has also been filled with pain and, a lot of torment. And Kane has also blamed Peter for that, which honestly kinda makes some sense. I mean, without Peter, Kane wouldn't even exist after all. Kane Parker is also an interesting one to include on this list, as he initially started out as somewhat of a villain who Spider-Man wanted to stop because Kane is not really against killing those who get in his way. Over the years though, their relationship has only gotten better, and Kane moved from initial antagonist in appearance to actually becoming a hero in his own right. As a hero, he also adopted the name Peter's other main clone Ben Reilly had once used, Scarlet Spider. Number 8. Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange and Spider-Man in the comics get along pretty well. However, in the MCU, maybe not so much. In No Way Home, Strange did endeavor to help Peter by making the world forget the secret identity of Spider-Man. Unfortunately, this did not go quite according to plan, as Peter's constant amendments to Stephen's spell caused it to go haywire, resulting in them cracking open the multiverse. Villains from all previous Spider-Man film franchise universes as a result spilled into their world, and when Strange asked Spider-Man and his friends to help with rounding them up so that Strange might seal the breach and send all these villains back home to return to their, well, pretty terrible fates, where they'd ultimately end up dead, Peter decided to go rogue and fight against Doctor Strange, as he believed the villains deserved a chance for redemption. In the end, Strange and Spider-Man still ended up working together to ultimately seal the breach and return everyone back home. But they definitely were not seeing eye to eye for quite a while there, with Strange and Spider-Man at one point even fighting against one another. Number 7. Captain America. This one might surprise you to hear, but at the end of the day, while these two may often work side by side and are both heroes, that doesn't mean that they always get along. Sometimes Spider-Man's attitude and more impulsive behavior bothers Captain America, which leads to some conflicts between them. There's also the fact that Spider-Man is more of a Tony Stark fan than a Steve Rogers fan, as was made pretty evident, at least initially, during the beginning of Civil War I. And while it doesn't feel like that long ago that Cap was actually helping Peter recover after being left briefly comatose after a fight with the UFOs, even more recently in issue number 23 of Amazing Spider-Man, Cap literally takes a punch and a shield bash, with his own shield no less, from a frustrated Peter. So yeah, I can't imagine he's always the biggest Spider-Man fan. Number 6. Akihiro. I have to imagine being at last year's Hellfire Gala with both of these two present there would be kinda awkward considering their history. One of the only interactions I know of with these two heroes was from back when Akihiro was known as Daken, when he was much more of a bad boy. Not to say that he still isn't one now. He might be a hero, but definitely still a bad boy. When Spider-Man and Akihiro met back in the day, it was as enemies. Spider-Man had infiltrated the Dark Avengers by pretending to be Mac Gargan, but was sniffed out by Daken, who was on the team, and the two literally fought one another. Daken also gave Spider-Man a bit of a run for his money before being knocked out by the web slinger. And while at the time Daken was a villain, he is now established as an anti-hero, at the very least, in the current X-Men Krakoan era, which is why I'm gonna count him here. Number 5. Proteus. While I don't think there is long-standing animosity between these two, in fact, I don't even think they've really interacted all that much over the course of their histories in comics, they did have a bit of a tussle at last year's Hellfire Gala, the 2022 Hellfire Gala. Here, Spider-Man at one point punched Proteus while attending as an esteemed guest. Not a great look, considering Proteus is a member of Krakoa's coveted Five, the 5 mutants who are solely responsible for resurrecting those mutants who have fallen. Spider-Man saw Proteus having an argument with MJ, but what he didn't know was that MJ's body was actually being held hostage and used by the now villainous Moira McTaggart, who also was recently revealed to have been a mutant all along. In the end, Spider-Man teamed up with Wolverine to save MJ, but even all that doesn't really change the fact or really justify Spider-Man completely just punching Proteus in the face, who at the time was really just talking to his evil, body-snatching mom, Moira. Number 4. Daredevil. While you would think these two street-level heroes would get along swimmingly since they're both fighting crime in the same city, New York, they actually clash more than you'd think. While Dee Dee and Spidey have teamed up on multiple occasions, they've also fought each other on multiple occasions as well. Typically what brings them to blows is their different approaches to heroics. Daredevil tends to be a bit more serious and often brutal in his tactics, I would say, while Spider-Man is more of a jokester whose approach to fighting crime is usually much lighter and usually less dark. Although, and I will say, both heroes also have their own moments of darkness as well as moments of levity. Number 3. The Punisher. Punisher doesn't really like most heroes to start off with, and when he actually started out in the comics, it was kind of as a foil and an antagonist for Spider-Man. He made his first appearance in issue number 129 of the Amazing Spider-Man series, and even was lined up to take a kill shot on the hero by the end of it. Ultimately, however, he didn't because he realized that Spider-Man was actually innocent of any wrongdoing and that he had been manipulated into fighting Spider-Man. Still, despite this, there have been many occasions where the two have actually come to blows. Typically, it's their different philosophies and perspectives on how best to hero that often cause tension between them. Number 2. Wolverine. Logan is probably one of the characters who is the most regularly annoyed by Spider-Man, and even then, these two have had quite a few team-ups in the past. Ultimately, what drives a wedge between them is the fact that they are so different, which is also often exacerbated by Wolverine's seemingly brash actions and also at times his comments towards MJ, or in some other universes, even his advances towards her. Number 1. Ben Reilly. Ben Reilly has been many things over the years, and as of most recently in the comics, he was known as the main villain of the Dark Web event. But that doesn't remove all the good he's done in the past as a hero. Ben Reilly is the clone of Spider-Man, and so you'd think that would make the two of them kinda like a family. But the reality is that Ben over time has become more and more jealous of the life that Peter has. A life that Peter has lived, but that Ben also remembers as his clone because he has Peter's memories. This has caused great animosity between them and is even a major motivation for Ben in the Dark Web event, where he acts as villain to Spider-Man. With the memories of Peter's life that were once also Ben's now gone, Ben blames Peter, becoming the villain known as Chasm, and is willing to even kill Peter to gain back these memories. Sure, I suppose he's less of a hero in this instance and as of recently in the comics as Chasm, but at one point he was very much a hero, and for that reason I'm gonna count him on this list.